Viewer discretion is advised.
After the Bears went 15-1 in 1985, it would be another 13 years until that feat was replicated. That's right, 13 years? What could go wrong? The 98 Vikings were an offensive juggernaut, the likes of which the league had never seen. A seasoned Hall of Fame wide receiver on one side in Chris Carter and a spectacular rookie on the other in Randy Moss. But while their kicker Gary Anderson had one of the best seasons of all time, nailing all 35 of his field goals and each of his 59 extra points. The one loss, a 24-27 affair to Trent Dilfer and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a tough-nosed football team based on a strong ground game and a solid defense. But there was one stat that was concerning for the Vikings. In their 15 wins, not one of them included a fourth quarter comeback. In other words, they hadn't faced any adversity. Minnesota made short work of Jake Plummer's Cardinals in the divisional round, which set up an NFC championship game at home against the 14-2 Falcons, who had won 7 one-score games in 1998. The Falcons, too, were built like the only team that had beaten the Vikings. An 1,800-yard rusher in Jamal Anderson that could keep the clock running. Fierce linebackers in Jesse Tuggle and Keith Brooking, and defensive backs that could contain their aerial attack. That all led to a 7-point Vikings lead in the fourth quarter. With a chance to ice the game, the Vikes trotted out their perfect kicker to punch their ticket to Super Bowl 33 to meet the Broncos. 38 yards, a chip shot. Anderson shanked it. Atlanta marched down the field, tied the game, and in overtime sent in their kicker Morton Anderson to kick his own 38-yarder that ended the game. Minnesota may have gone 15-1, but lack of experience in tight games was their downfall. The NFL's shiny new toy, US Bank, didn't let being in a wintertime frozen wasteland stop it from hosting Super Bowl 52. A place I'm willing to bet EDP blew up the bathroom in before he cried tears of joy. With its transparent roof, huge jumbotron, and dynamic sound engineering, the indoor stadium truly is a marvel of engineering and technology, and it definitely is in the top tier. Good thing this was an indoor facility, another head scratcher of a Super Bowl host. A stadium that was held together with air pressure, fabric, hefty bags, and duct tape. The Metrodome laid witness to the second of the Bills' devastating losses to an NFC East team. Demolished in 2014 after a roof collapsed, the Metrodome was replaced with US Bank Stadium. This has to be one hell of a place in order to get the Super Bowl to come out to freaking Minneapolis, which used to be part of America. The interior of the stadium is gorgeous, with a translucent roof and walls to let light in. Plus, they don't have to worry about the building retaining outside heat because there isn't any. The Vikings haven't had many head coaches, but the one that didn't stick was Les Steckel, who went 3-13 in his only go-round in 1984. The Vikings decided against more Steckel and opted to go back to famous cold weather lover Bud Grant, who went 7-9 the next year and retired. The worst defeat at home for the Vikings will always be the space between Gary Anderson's kick and the uprights. But in terms of points, nothing was worse than the 42-point loss at the hands of the St. Louis Cardinals back in 1963. Fran Tarkenton was outclassed by Charlie Johnson, and the Vikes were put on ice. Back when they played outside, of course. What a terrible time that must have been. US Bank Stadium, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Coming in at about $498 million taxpayer dollars, US Bank Stadium in Minneapolis spends about half of those funds wiping off the dead birds that fly into the glass. By leveraging gambling, cigarette sales, and corporate taxes, Minnesota sought to have every degenerate in the state fund their stadium, especially those who smoke cigarettes, and the on-field product is enough to make you want to burn a heater or two. Bring up the name Kirk Cousins to a Vikings fan and don't say a word. And y'all already doing this.
Right? And what was her sister? A princess! The Wicked Witch of the East, bro!
I'm just arguing for no reason. Except dude is so mid, you could just call him Zendaya. Wow, Zendaya catching strays. I'm sorry. You've hosted more Super Bowls than you've won. I was gonna let your blood pressure come down, but then I had to bring up Mike Zimmer. A winner in life, just not on the football field. And here's the kicker. Your kickers.
Minnesota Vikings. Congrats, Vikings fans. You're the most successful franchise to never win a Super Bowl, which is a lot like a hot woman telling you that you have a great face for radio. I know most of you fans don't like Kirk Cousins because of his contract, even though he turns out 4,000-yard, 30-touchdown seasons like nothing. You want that elusive Super Bowl ring so badly that you still celebrate Anthony Barr injuring Aaron Rodgers in 2017, even though it makes you all look like complete assholes. Justin Jefferson is a great young player, sure, but wide receivers don't matter. Let's look at past great Vikings wide receivers, shall we? Chris Carter, 0 rings. Randy Moss, 0 rings. Adam Thielen, 0 rings. Stephon Diggs, 0 rings. As long as Cousins is your quarterback, you will never win anything important and will always be the Packers' bitch. And oh yeah, Randy Moss was not as good as Jerry Rice, and Harrison Smith is overrated. Minnesota Vikings, Kirk Cousins. Kirk will always put up elite stats and end with a mediocre record. How much of this is him being a legendary stat patter and how much of it is just bad luck? I think it's a mix of both. Regardless, nobody is afraid of Kirk, and that reflects poorly on him, fair or not. But he's still an objectively good quarterback. Verdict? Properly rated. Minnesota Vikings, Justin Jefferson. Jefferson has had one of the best first 2 seasons any receiver has ever had. He is a legitimate stud, no offense to lesbian couples. There really isn't any aspect he isn't good at, and the Vikings are lucky they stumbled into him after trading away Stephon Diggs. However, through no fault of his own, the wins haven't been there. I look forward to seeing how he plays in games of consequence. Minnesota Vikings, Teddy Bridgewater. Teddy Two Gloves has always had a weird fan base of bloggers and reporters that love him for some reason, and I've never understood it. He's always had a noodle arm, he's always been excruciatingly boring to watch, and in 2 seasons as Minnesota's starter, he barely threw any touchdowns. It was obvious Minnesota was not getting what they thought out of their first round pick, and then he suffered a brutal injury before the 2016 season that knocked him out for almost 2 years. Still, he has lots of believers, which I'll never understand, even if he's a nice guy. Minnesota Vikings, Danielle Hunter. Hunter is phenomenal when he's healthy, but he hasn't been healthy since 2019, playing in just 7 games over the last 2 years. I have no doubt he can still be a great player as he's only 27, but you can't be considered a star player if you can't stay on the Minnesota Vikings 1998 NFC Championship game. The 1998 Vikings went 15-1, broke the single season record for points, and were 11-point favorites heading into the 1998 NFC Championship game against the Falcons. Minnesota was in control for the entire game and had a 7-point lead and a chip shot field goal attempt with 2 minutes left to go up 10 and virtually end the game. But All-Pro kicker Gary Anderson, who hadn't missed a kick all season, wouldn't you know it, missed the kick. Atlanta took advantage and tied the game with a touchdown to send the game into overtime. Minnesota got 2 chances in overtime to win, but punted both times before Atlanta kicked the game-winning field goal to win 30-27. Imagine that. The Falcons were the clutch team. Minnesota Vikings, Christian Ponder. Remember when I said shitty NFL quarterbacks always get the hottest wives? Ponder is further proof of that. Drafted 12th overall in 2011 to be the franchise quarterback for Minnesota, he ended up being one of the worst starters in football for 3 years before spending his 4th season mostly on the bench. He finished with 38 touchdowns, 36 interceptions, and a 75.9 passer rating, which are arguably the best numbers of every quarterback on this list. He did a great job handing the ball off to Adrian Peterson, though. Can't deny it. Fran Tarkenton. Tarkenton had 2 stints with the Vikings. The first was from 1961 to 1966, where he made 2 Pro Bowls before jettisoning off to the Giants for 5 seasons. When Tarkenton returned to Minnie from 1972 to 1978, the team really took off. He made 3 more Pro Bowls, including winning the 1975 MVP. The Vikings also made it to 3 Super Bowls in this stretch, but they came away empty-handed. Like Marino, Tarkenton retired with pretty much every single record for quarterbacks. Tarkenton wasn't a great playoff quarterback, but his career and longevity is extremely underrated, especially considering the era he played in. Victor, Vikings. Who doesn't love a man with rugged good looks and a guilty smile that says, "I just clogged your toilet"? Victor here is obviously on massive amounts of HGH. I'm curious as to how he got the NFL football axe, considering his people were around thousands of years before the NFL even existed. God damn, a time-traveling Viking sounds pretty fucking cool, actually. Rating? 5 out of 10. Minnesota. The Vikings are only relevant for about 1 to 2 years every decade when they lose in the NFC Championship game, either in devastating fashion like 1998 or 2009, or by getting the ever-loving shit kicked out of them like 2000 or 2017. The other 8 to 9 years are spent floating around in mediocrity with a few awful seasons sprinkled in. By the way, the Vikings have lost 4 Super Bowls in addition to all these conference championship game losses. losses. Anyway, your quarterback is plexiglass-loving nutjob Kirk Cousins, who has great stats, yet you would never trust him in a big game. Outside of New Orleans in 2019, of course, since every quarterback has had their hallmark moment against Breeze's Saints. Cousins typically destroys bad teams, so you will never be terrible with him, but his ceiling is low. Justin Jefferson is going to be a stud, sure, but the value of great wide receivers has always been overstated. Adrian Peterson is the best player you've had over the last 15 years, and he beat the shit out of his infant children like they were animals. Never forget the Love Boat saga either. Oh, and one last thing. Randy Moss is not better than Jerry Rice. Moss was washed up by age 33, while Rice was a 1,000-yard receiver in his 40s. End of 70s Vikings. Whereas the first three entrants on this list all brought home at least one title during the 1970s, the Vikings came up empty-handed. That's not to say they weren't close, though. The main reason they make this list is due to 3 Super Bowls in a 4-year span from 1973 to 1976. Although they would lose all 3 in decisive fashion. They made the playoffs 8 times in the decade and were consistently competitive due to their infamous Purple People Eaters defenses. They were never able to seal the deal.
Someone who absolutely robbed the NFL? I think of Sam Bradford. For his 35-45 career record as a starter, he earned $124 million. If Sam Bradford was a bank robber, then this next guy might just be a con man. Kirk Cousins may be one of the most polarizing QBs in NFL history. Bring up his record in primetime, and you have a case he's a bum. Show his stats, and he's getting fitted for a yellow jacket. So who is this man who might earn $250 million in his career? And is he the real deal, or does he have us all fooled? Let's find out right after this. The word con man is defined as a man who cheats or tricks someone by gaining their trust and persuading them to believe something that is not true. The shortened word con comes from confidence, as the scammer cannot pull off his evil without giving the air that he truly believes in himself. If you take a cursory look at Kirk Cousins' Pro Football Reference page, you'll see some impressive statistics. And yet if you ask any serious football fan, 99 out of 100 will have Cousins outside of their top 10 active quarterbacks. The one dissenter is a dentist from Minnesota who doesn't endorse the use of toothbrushes. Still, his numbers since 2015 are some of the most consistent in the league. But when you investigate Cousins a little further, there's just something off about him. Who is Kirk Cousins? A 3-sport athlete at Holland Christian High School in Michigan. Cousins was just a 2-star recruit when Mark D'Antonio offered him a scholarship to play for the Michigan State Spartans. After backing up Brian Hoyer, Cousins eventually ascended to starter in 2009 and became a 3-year captain. His senior year, Cousins led the Spartans to their first ever Big Ten championship game, where he faced Russell Wilson. Cousins threw his 3rd touchdown late in the 3rd quarter, building an 8-point lead for Sparty. But in the 4th, he went quiet. After a Monty Ball touchdown put the Badgers ahead, Captain Kirk was given a golden opportunity to mount a game-winning drive at the end of regulation. In the biggest moment of the season, Cousins went 3 and out. A few months later, he entered the NFL as the ultimate insurance policy. Despite spending the 2nd overall pick on Baylor's Heisman-winning quarterback RG3, Mike Shanahan hedged his bets and used a 4th-round pick on Cousins. It turned out to be a rare, wise move by Washington. After an electric rookie campaign came to a painful end in the playoffs, RG3 would never come close to repeating his first-year magic, and Cousins would find himself on the field. In his first 19 starts, Kirk was 5-14, but in Week 7 of 2015, Washington had a 2-4 record and was staring at a 24-point deficit against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Then, something clicked.
You like that? You like that?
Kirk Cousins had remembered it was a contract year. The confidence had shown up. After turning the ship around in spectacular fashion, Washington went from the precipice of 2-5 all the way to 9-7, a division title and a home playoff game. In the wild card round against the Packers, a Kirk Cousins strike to Jordan Reed put Washington ahead 11-0 in the early going. That would obviously not hold up. But when you take a closer look at Washington's 2015 campaign, something stands out. All of their 9 wins came against losing teams. The 3 times they were challenged by teams that finished above 500, they were outscored 46-105. Kirk threw just 3 touchdowns and 4 picks in those games. So when the Green Bay Packers came storming back and won the game by 17 points, it shouldn't have come as a surprise. Washington was a paper tiger led by a quarterback who had feasted on the bottom feeders in the NFL. Regardless of the collapse, the playoff season had earned Kirk some credibility, something every con man needs, and Washington was interested in keeping him around. Well, sort of. Before he could hit the open market, Cousins was slapped with the franchise tag, which paid him $19.9 million for 1 season. In the 2016 season, Kirk led the Skins back to the doorstep of the playoffs. In the last week, Washington had a win-and-in scenario, but in a potential game-winning drive, Cousins threw a game-sealing interception down 3 points with under 2 minutes left in the game. He was rewarded with a second straight franchise tag that paid him a shade under $24 million in 2017. Funny that a place as shady as Washington wasn't sold on this guy. For the 3rd straight season, Cousins' numbers made him look competent, but the team finished under 500. The difference between that team and the 2015 squad wasn't much different, other than the fact that in 2017, Washington played 10 games against teams that finished with a winning record. And they went 2-8 in those games. Again, much like a swindler, Kirk wasn't there when you needed him most. In his final game for Washington, Cousins registered a certified stinker, throwing 3 picks and no touchdowns against the lowly 2-13 Giants. Needless to say, Washington could have slapped Cousins with the tag for a 3rd straight year, which would have paid him $34.5 million in 2018. Instead, Cousins was allowed to walk. And what he found on the open market was a lot of money, and it was all guaranteed. On March 13, 2018, the Minnesota Vikings ponied up for Kirk Cousins. 3 years, $84 million. In fact, it was the largest fully guaranteed contract at the time. And the dude had no allegations against him. And for their investment, Cousins delivered in the 2018 season with 30 touchdowns, 4,300 yards, and just 10 interceptions. Not so scummy, eh? Unfortunately, it only translated into 8 wins for a Viking squad that had advanced to the NFC Championship game with Case Keenum just a year prior. It was an immensely talented roster, and Cousins' stats were good. How did things go wrong? When you zoom in on Cousins' splits in 2018, everything looks normal, and then something fishy starts to stand out. The Vikings played 5 primetime games in 2018, and in those games, the team went just 1-4. When you zoom out, you'll notice that this isn't just an anomaly for Cousins in his career. It's more of what we'd call a trend. Cousins has played 27 night games in his career and has won just 10 of those marquee matchups. Overall, he has put up a passer rating of 98.6 in his 10-year career, but when the sun goes down, that number drops all the way down to 95.9, and his touchdown to interception ratio becomes very mediocre. These are numbers that put context to the perception around Cousins. Even if his raw stats are good to great, no one is taking Kirk Cousins with the game on the line. Of course, there is one game that bucks that narrative. A whole season, really. In Cousins' second year as a Viking in 2016, the team made the playoffs with a 10-6 record. In the wild card round, Cousins led a game-winning drive in the Superdome that was capped off by a walk-off touchdown pass to Kyle Rudolph. When the chips were down, Kirk had the finest moment of his career in a hostile environment. A capable man, not a con man. But if you look deeper, Cousins once again only notched just 1 victory against a winning team in that regular season, an easy W against the 9-7 Eagles. And in the divisional round against the best team in the NFC, Cousins' performance was tepid at best. His numbers looked better than Jimmy Garoppolo, but when the 49ers clamped down on the run game, Kirk could only muster 6 yards per pass, taking 6 sacks along the way. After a high point, we are all reminded that Cousins' performance in the Big Easy was an exception to the rule. Now let's look at his last 2 seasons, 2020 and 2021. For the last 2 years, Cousins has, according to the numbers, been one of the best quarterbacks in football. He started 32 games, thrown 68 touchdowns, just 20 picks, and was sacked on less than 5% of his dropbacks in 2021. He was also named a Pro Bowler. And yet, despite that delicious box score goodness, the Vikings have posted a losing record over the last 2 years. It all goes back to his record against winning teams. In 2020, Kirk and the Vikings defeated just 1 winning team in 6 tries. A year later, they were 3-7 against winning teams. There is perhaps no moment that illustrates the Kirk Cousins roller coaster better than one particular drive in Week 9 against the Baltimore Ravens. Kirk was admittedly dynamite in the last 2 minutes, completing a 4th and 9 pass and then sending the game to overtime with a 1-yard touchdown to Adam Thielen. On the Ravens' first drive in the overtime period, Vikings linebacker Anthony Barr tipped and intercepted a Lamar Jackson pass. And to follow up that play, Cousins and the Vikings offense promptly went 3 and out, leaving no option but to punt. One drive later, Justin Tucker ended the game. This is the mystery and the illusion of Kirk Cousins, and he causes you to question whether he deserves so much money. So, is he a con man or not? Most of Kirk Cousins' numbers are largely meaningless. All but one. $231,669,486. That's the amount of dollars he's made since being drafted in 2012. Cousins has signed 6 contracts in his career. It's a testament to 2 teams' simultaneous reluctance and reliance in an NFL landscape where competent quarterbacks are hard to come by. It's also a testament to Cousins' shrewd business sense. He maximizes his earnings on short-term, mostly guaranteed deals and always plays well enough to justify the next one. Of course, he isn't out there intentionally stealing money, and I don't think he's an actual con man. He's actually a good guy. But metaphorically speaking, here's the big question. When you need Kirk Cousins the most, does he show up or not?
Thinking about running one
He took
play.
the knee, though. He took the knee.
He did
so
take
now it's
a
going to
knee.
run out.